All right, folks, welcome again to Go Boulder's YouTube channel. And I want to take a minute to talk about something that's been coming up a lot and something that I've been working on indirectly and also just kind of as a research project for quite a while here. And it's coming up a lot more. And that is zombie startups. And just real quick, what is a zombie startup? This is going to describe it, but you think about a zombie in fiction as this clearly dead thing that is still exhibiting signs of life, if we're really kind of just being very crude and straightforward about that. So, zombie startup definition: a zombie startup is a venture that stays alive on existing revenue and cash, grows too slowly to attract new capital, or justify founders' time. And that is right out of the gate. That's a really kind of dark, fairly biased definition of a zombie startup because this whole idea is a startup, especially a venture backed startup, has this expectation of extremely rapid growth. If you have reliable customer acquisition, if you are running on a profit, there's nothing wrong with that, even if that's considered a zombie startup. And especially that line, justify a founder's time, is a pretty grim take. And so we'll talk more about that in a minute. But zombie startups, alive on paper, dead in the market. Here's how to know if you're walking and how to run again. This resource shows the signal psychology and plays to either reignite growth or call time of death. Time of death, God. An NRR zombie, so that's specifically on the revenue side, is a SaaS startup that fell out of product market fit after the 2021 boom, but has enough revenue and 90 to 100% NRR to keep going. That's much more specific. I don't think it's always specifically NRR, although, I mean, that makes sense. And I also don't think that chunk there is universally applicable. Fell out of product market fit after 2021 is so specific. And this category actually applies to a lot more than that. So I don't think that's totally true. But in general, the theory still applies. What is a zombie startup again? Zombie startup is a venture that has just enough capital, goodwill, or sunk cost momentum to keep operating, but not enough traction to justify further investment. Ouch. Or meaningfully grow. It survives quarter to quarter on life support, angel bridges, down route safes, or deferred salaries while metrics stagnate. Now that hits on another key part where in this case, a zombie startup is losing more money than it's gaining. So it has revenue, but that revenue is at a level that is unsustainable. And exactly when it goes out is just a question of time, not a question of if. So that's an important piece to highlight, and that's different than the definition earlier, because that references that sounds much more dire. That is actually the company is not meeting payroll consistently. That's worse. Unlike outright failures, that above reads like an outright failure to me, zombies consume years of founder time and investor cash in the hope that something, market shift, acquisition, Hail Mary feature, will revive them. The danger: every extra month compounds opportunity cost and dilutes narrative equity. And at the end of this, I actually have a pretty major example of what I consider a zombie startup that I want to go ahead and highlight that does contradict some of these points. So let's see. This guide surfaces 8 common red flags and concrete plays for revival or shutdown. I love it. I love it. Let's see it. Treat it as a 90-day immunity window. Act decisively or accept the Walking Dead label. And I've skipped right into this. Shout out to the Startup to Scale Up website. This is a pretty cool guide and a really interesting piece. And as I was doing research on zombie startups and kind of finding a good, concrete, comprehensive definition of what that is that I could talk through, this really stood out as a particularly good one. So shout out to these guys. Here we go. Why you won't admit it's dead. You raised the seed, hired friends, and told TechCrunch you'd change the industry. Pulling the plug feels like social suicide. Again, very specific, but the metaphor works. Sunk cost bias, identity fusion, and investor expectation create a cognitive moat. And one thing I talked about earlier today is this idea that there are moments where founders know that it's dying. They know the company is a zombie, they're aware of that, but they fudge it or hide it or cover up the numbers until it's too late to save it. Um, and that's a particularly dark case that could happen. So I really hope that this is a conversation we can have. And if you are a startup founder watching this and you think you're in the zombie territory, I would love it if you would quietly reach out to me and we can talk through it. That's one of the big things I'm doing here. I would love to understand more what happens in these situations, talk to companies or specific examples, company by company, under the promise of strict anonymity. I won't talk to an investor about this. I won't do anything like that. I will not break confidence, but I would be a sounding board that you can talk to kind of talk to, figure out what to do next. Open offer. And this just saying like sunk cost bias isn't like we put this much into it, surely we have to see it through, or I am the founder of this company and that's who I am would be the identity fusion. And investor expectation, of course, is you have investors who believe in you, they've invested in you. One of the most difficult conversations to have is to go to a major investor who invested in you and say, hey, we are not meeting expectations. We have to pull the plug. And depending on the personalities involved, that can be a really challenging conversation. So you have to, if you're doing a raise, you should always have in your back of mind, how do I approach this conversation if in 2 years we haven't made it? Like, at what point do I personally call it in this case? At what point do I go to the investor and tell them we're not going to deliver in the way that you want and how that conversation goes? There should be fail safes in place in the paperwork you sign. And that should be a conversation you have in the back of your mind just in case. Not to assume it's going to happen, of course, but in the case that it does, you want that to be an honest conversation and not destroy any level of trust that you could have built before that. Because the upfront conversation ultimately is going to be the best choice, even if there are negative consequences or some fallout from that. We're talking about zombie startups here. There's going to be some dark moments, but we'll go into that. If that's you, ooh, set an explicit live die metric. There it is right there. E.g., 10% MOM, net new ARR for 3 consecutive months, month over month, net new ARR. So new income over the next couple months. If you miss it, flip into turnaround or wind down, which is aggressive new plays, turnaround, or wind down as in prepare to shut down. And here's some examples of why startups turn zombie. Number one, mispriced capital. Seed money delays harsh truths. Bridges mask product market absence. For say, for example, you get funding for 5 years. You spend three and you don't get anywhere near the gains you expected. You could see it through to the end of the 5 years, which is a long runway. Or you could go ahead and realize like this is not working and I need to call it sooner than later. That goes into that sunk cost fallacy where you do want to believe it's going to keep working and you want to keep going as if it's going to work, but you also need to be very honest and upfront with yourself and your company what the runway looks like and take the time to change course before it's too late. Because the thing is, it's a lot better to be like, hey, this may not be working. Let's review at 3 of 5 than it is 4.5 out of 5. At that point, you're out of runway, you're out of options. So while you still have the money to spend to pay your people, you want to make sure that you're checking in on this, making sure that your growth is matching what you need it to be. Then there's the builder's freeze, which is founders cling to a roadmap tweaks instead of confronting distribution failure. And that's a big priority for me. I'm a really big customer and product guy where I like to review which pieces aren't working and what can be improved every single day. Because there's never a moment where there's not something that you can adjust or fix. There's not a slight course adjustment you can make. There's not a slight change you can make to the plan. And you need to be aware of flags to change the plan earlier than later so that, again, you have the time and the runway to pivot before it becomes a bigger problem. Now, you don't want to move too often or too soon because that can also be a problem, but that's, case by case decision making. Vanity KPI addiction. Ooh. Total signups, press hits, awards, none convert to ARR. And that's true in basically any industry, any level, especially as a solo founder or a small startup. You do have to be earning revenue. You have to be making payroll. That's the big thing. Keeping the lights on. Decision paralysis. No one wants to cut project staff or pivot narrative. And that's another challenging one too. But again, as we did with mispriced capital and builders freeze, that again is something you want to be able to do earlier than later. You want to have a clear picture and a clear view of what's going on at all times so that you can catch the stuff early and head it off. Then we've got weak market gravity. Problem is real, but urgency, willingness to pay isn't. And that's another important one too, because you do want something. Another kind of project I've been working on a lot recently is monetization policy. Where can you make the most money with the fewest barriers? Where do you catch people where they have money to spend when they're either making a sale or making a lot of profit, or you can really jump into a place where people don't mind paying? Because that's the point where people are going to be the most likely to renew, the most likely to pay you is in that moment where again they either have money to spend or are actively making money off of your platform. Those are the two kind of core lowest friction places to go ahead and find monetization. The less you're chasing revenue, the more you can focus on building and running the company. And that's always a challenging balance, but that's always something to keep in mind when you're building the thing in the first place. How do you get money early? How do you get paying customers early? And how do you build on that initial success? Not create that initial success later, but start with initial success and then grow. Investor echo loop. Waiting for the next round becomes the strategy. And this is really one of the places where you can really land on a zombie company is, and we're seeing some of this with these AI companies that have been around for a minute. They have raised enormous amounts of money and haven't paid back even a tiny fraction of it. They may still, but the thing is that they're in a moment where they can raise money. They can raise indefinite amounts of money for an indefinite amount of time. The challenge is that door could close any minute, and they don't necessarily know when. And so if they are not independently profitable right now, able to keep the lights on and able to pay their bills, then if funding shuts all of a sudden, how many of these AI companies will still be able to stay in business? That's a real scary gut check that I think keeps Jensen Huang of NVIDIA up at night, but is something you really want to keep an eye on. Are we sustainable? And a shout out to Buffer here, the social media company out there. Some years back, the founder of Buffer spent the money he had to buy the company back from investors to really take the reins of it and be able to have total control over how fast they grew or didn't and their actual revenue stream. And that was a huge piece of freedom for him, a big kind of leap of faith in what he was doing, but also really extraordinarily like inspiring moment. And that is a touch point that I wanted to go ahead and highlight because in some cases, being a zombie is as much an issue of expectations and your current position as it is actually being a failed business. Because a lot of this has these negative connotations when it could just be that the goals you were chasing before are not the ones you're actually going to achieve or the ones you actually want to build long term. Do the comparison of like a venture founded startup versus a bootstrap startup. The bootstrap startup kind of grows as quickly as you can grow. It may never get a lot of traction or momentum, but it's growing according to how much work you put in theory. Whereas the venture backed one has this expectation to grow faster, 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 skyrocketing growth, high growth, grow to an exit, grow to a return on the investment. And those are very different kind of pressure levels. And there are plenty of zombie companies out there that could successfully pivot to a buyback and or bootstrap model without going the VC route and could turn down some future raises, even some raises in the process of now, restructure a little bit and find a slower but longer term sustainable path to success. There's still room for that in plenty of these. So keep going. Here are the 8 most common red flags. Number 1, finance and runway. Burn over growth. Runway shrinking, that is spending money faster than you're earning it so that your revenue is not keeping up with your expenses. Signal, monthly burn doubles ARR growth rate for 3 consecutive quarters. So that's a solid metric you can do for this. So this is an example of you are spending money faster than you're earning it over an extended period of time. And 3 quarters is, 3 quarters of a year. Why it happens. Founders chase just one more feature instead of pricing, positioning, or distribution. So you're not doing more sales, you're not doing more retention, you're not doing price increases or other revenue models. You are investing heavily in development first. And there's a balance to that. You do want to continue doing development, but you want to make sure it's in a sustainable way. Founder blind spot, confusing activity with progress, which if you're on a podcast every single day as a founder, that feels good. But if that's not translating to revenue growth, back to the top. Unlock Play, freeze hiring, move to monthly cash reporting, replace flagship SKU within 30 days. And that is, so here's the 3 reasons why it happens. And then this last one is a solution you can do. So the Unlock Play is extend your runway. So this is both extend your runway by freezing hiring, not bringing on more people, working with what you have. So you reduce your increasing expenses or you stop your expenses from increasing. Move to monthly cash reporting is a really good way to keep track of your finances and track whether you are improving the problem or not. And there's that reprice flagship SKU within 30 days is to do a price increase to see if that helps generate a healthy level of revenue. And then the nuclear option is your shutdown, which is slim to single best-selling segment, fire customers who don't pay back in 90 days. Yeah, so you don't want to be chasing down customers to get them to pay. Like that's not a spot anyone wants to be in. Um, and so there is that kind of cut people off when they're 90 days overdue on paying, because that is a possible case for a startup where you could have customers under contract who have not paid in, 6 months. Like I've seen that before. It's not super common, but it's definitely something to watch for. There should be clear expectation like we need payment on some level within this window on of this percentage, right? And if you have a ton of customers that are not paying, that's an obvious problem. Negative unit economics is the next category. Gross margin collapses when first discount ends or ad spend pauses. So you got your ad spend is your user acquisition. Your first discount is your trial period, for example. Um, Signal, CAC 18-month LTV and playback model churn is greater than 6% monthly. That's not bad. Like the 6% churn, you're talking about a 94% retention rate, which is generally considered pretty good, especially in startup space where you tend to have a lot of turnover. But that is an important signal to see higher there. And that, especially if that is increasing, or if it goes from 6 to 7 to 8 to 12, like you get a jump. If your churn is increasing and your retention is going down, that's an implication that your overall customer base is unhealthy. And that's something to check on as quickly as possible. And really, that's where bringing somebody like me talk about customer success and try to understand why customers are churning and fix it quick. And not just fix that part, but also improve retention to the point where it goes from 6 to 4 instead of 6 to 8. Why it happens. Land grab mindset, subsidized by VC money, no pricing power. Yeah, so there you look at Canva right now. They're giving out free trials like crazy, but then they get to users like me who are not paying users. We're just not. It's not like I don't see enough incentive to use Canva Pro, and I'll switch to alternatives if they hold me back too much. I don't even use the free trials. I just use the free version. So I'm not doing free trials of the Pro. And that is a whole thorny conversation. We'll get to that later. No pricing power. So you have enough money in the bank to go ahead and just acquire users, acquire users, acquire users, acquire users. It's not enough to just acquire users. You need at least a measurable subset of those customers to be paying customers. That's critical. If you have no paying customers or a really low proportion of paying customers, there's a bit of a problem with your current customer base or your product market fit. So you got to figure out, are we targeting the right users? Do we have a compelling enough case to make people actually become paying users? Founder blind spot again. There's a lot of, oh, this is actually, yeah, okay. Assuming scale will fix margin while ignoring contribution losses. Same thing. If you have 10,000 free trials, but one of them is a paid customer, that's really bad. Unlock play, so how you can kind of come up from this, is kill unprofitable channels, which is stop the free trials, stop the major ad spends, or take a look at which teams are the most expensive and see if there's a direct impact. And that's one I'm very cautious about because these things like marketing and customer success sometimes have a high investment with a not really visible return on investment. But you want to look at that really, really closely. Talk to your customers, understand completely if your marketing and customer success is actually not having a return on investment, which is something to fix, or if it's a matter of being hidden in other ways. Like, say, for example, your sales team gets twice as many appointments in sales because of customer success, which is something that happens, but is often misattributed to not being customer success contribution because sales close the deal. And the raise prices 30% seems arbitrary, but raise prices by X percent. Yeah. Ditch free tier. Yeah, to completely get rid of the free usage. I would consider that potentially a nuclear option, but making sure that your pro tier has things that will actually encourage people to jump to the pro tier. And I don't think that means taking features away from the free tier. That's important to note. But it does mean making sure that the case for your paid tiers are good enough that people will actually pay for them. That means reasonable pricing. That means a good feature spread. That means advertising the things that people actually want and use in a way that makes people want to use it. And again, I talked about those low friction payment steps, like the places where people are most willing to pay when they have money, when they're making money off of your tool, and when they are, or when it's cheap. Let's be honest. If it's a self-help option, they can just pay $5 a month. Like that's something that you're going to be able to sell. And then nuclear option is slim to the single best-selling segment. Fire customers who don't pay back in 90 days. That looks familiar. So yeah, those two are more or less the same. Bridge round loop. Ooh. Company survives on rolling safes every 9 to 12 months with flat caps, meaning you're just consistently raising and you're extending your runway without making any meaningful progress in between. So there's a signal, more investor updates than customer logos, which means you are talking to investors more than you are bringing on new customers. That's bad. Why it happens? Investors protect Mark, founders stall hard decisions. And so that just means there's a misalignment of focus where, and this is perfectly understandable on a very human level, is like as a founder, it can be really easy to say, like, this is how I keep the lights on. If you're really good and have a really good, if you're really good at networking with investors and have a really strong network of investors who continue giving you lifelines, that is good, but it can't be the only thing you're doing. Founder Plaza, treating bridge as validation instead of rescue. So every time you take out a loan to push a little bit further because you're not sustainable without it, that is a warning signal, not a success story. Unlock play, set all hands bridge diet, runway to 24 months without new capital. So that is, how do we make this sustainable without doing another raise? And that's a really great point to jump onto and a really important thing to go ahead and do. It's a good move. Nuclear option is to sell company or IP within 180 days and return residual cash. Boy, and that's fair. It does say that's the nuclear option. But the thing is, like I said before, having that hard conversation with your investors, the longer you delay that, the harder it gets, the bigger the risk gets, and the worse the consequences get. So you want to make sure you're having those honest conversations internally with yourself, and then also going to your investors sooner than later. You don't want to spook them, you don't want to scare them away, but you also don't want to hide things. And this is tricky. So this also is something important for investors to understand. Investors have to be more open to having these challenging conversations without threatening, without pulling out funding. Sometimes that's the right play, but it's important that your investees, startups you're investing in, are comfortable enough bringing the tough conversations to you that you actually know this stuff. It's just like anything else. There's a push and pull between being tough and fair and being scary. And if your founders know that you are going to pull funding the second there's a warning sign, they are not going to be honest with you. So that's really important to watch. You want to make sure that you're at a point where your founders can tell you when things look a little bit shady earlier than later. Encourage that feedback, encourage those conversations. You don't want your founders to coddle you and tell you what you want to hear. You want them to tell you what's going on. So you want to make sure that's a clear expectation and that you are open to those conversations and that you don't just punish founders who talk to you. If you need to pull things out or have a really strict option, work with the founder, negotiate, figure out how to make this a fair relationship because this founder could come back and next one could be a unicorn. You don't know. So this does go on both sides. Leadership and culture. And this is, there's finance and runway. Here's leadership and culture. And this is, we're about halfway due. We'll see. This still is an important conversation. This has been pretty good, both at outlining some of the established risks and information from this article. I like it a lot. But it's also really good helping kind of talk through the individual things that each point brings up. So, leadership and culture. Founder paychecks, no growth plan. So, the founder is paying themselves but doesn't have a plan to grow it. Team draws market salaries, which I assume breeds as competitive salaries, while milestones slip quarter after quarter. So, no consequences for paying high and under delivering. Signal board decks recycle last quarter KPIs with next quarter goals copy pasted. That's not great. Now, you could have consistent quarter over quarter goals. That's not the worst, but that is something to watch for. If you have a copy pasted board deck, it's a warning sign. And then why it happens is emotional sunk cost plus lifestyle inertia. There's a sense of pride that you're doing something. Like it said at the top, you've told TechCrunch that you're going to redefine an industry. Maybe it's true, but you got to check yourself. You need that level of humility and self-awareness to make sure, like, are we actually delivering on that promise or are we just used to this and excited? Founder blind spot, mistaking working hard for compound progress, which is really similar to the other ones. This whole thing where doing your day-to-day tasks and clearing your to-do list doesn't necessarily mean success, depending on what your to-do list is, what you're actually doing day to day, and how effective it actually is long term. Unlock play, tie comp to new MRR targets and publish weekly traction updates. So that is incentivizing pay to results. And then there's also publishing weekly traction updates. And that's kind of incentivizing, like, here's what we've gained, celebrating the wins. Those are both fair points, but in every single one of these cases, one of the things you really want to do is be clear on what the problem is. if there is a problem, you should know what it is, where it's coming from. Because if you don't even know what the problem is, that makes fixing it near impossible. So in a case like that for the unlock play, that's a very specific unlock play that may or may not actually be applicable to the specific issue, but it's there. And then nuclear option slash founder salary to subsistence. So your minimum, what you need to get by, keep the lights on until month over month growth is greater than 10%. And that greater than 10%, that is the kind of growth you should have in any kind of startup level. That's high growth by non-startup standards, but growing 10% customer base every single month is that's good growth. So yeah, so greater than or equal to 10%. So next up, vanity metrics spin. Oof. Pitch decks highlight cumulative signups while actives shrink. So that would be user signups, even if the users never open the app or or log into the platform. Signal ARPU and WAU missing from board reporting. This weekly active users, and I'm not sure what ARPU is actually. Why it happens. Narrative maintenance beats reality. Cognitive distance sets in, where you're telling yourself such a positive, uplifting story that you actually start to miss out on warning signs. Founder blind spot. Storytelling is greater than truth telling, which, yeah, sometimes if you're really good at telling a story, including to yourself, you can get to the point where you believe the things that aren't strictly true. And we've all seen that happen to people. It's happened to each of us too. Unlock play, flip dashboard, only cohort based revenue metrics allowed. Interesting. And then the nuclear option is external operating partner takes interim CEO role. Ooh. And that Now, this can depend, right? It really depends on whether or not the weak point is the founder. And especially in the vanity metric spin, there's a good chance there's a leadership issue there. But I have seen plenty of cases where an external leader taking the reins of a company is the reason it goes into zombie mode, or the reason a sale fails, or the reason the company flounders where it was growing really well. So that's not guaranteed to be a fix. That is a good option to have. But as someone who really values founders and the core that makes a founder, especially a successful, good founder, getting to the point where you're having these conversations, where you have successfully raised, where you are growing, there is some level where you've done things right. And that is important to highlight and important to go ahead and lean on. And replacing the CEO with somebody who didn't build it and doesn't necessarily understand it is a huge, huge risk. So I appreciate that that's under the nuclear option, but I'm immediate warning flags on that because I've seen that go bad many times. Go to market. No new logos in 6 months. No new customers in 6 months. Ouch. Pipeline exists only in CRM stages, never converts. Ooh, brutal. I feel that. Signal, same top 20 prospects recycle across quarters. So you're not winning the people you think you should be, which means either redefining your ICP, your ideal customer profile, or changing out your prospects or bringing in new prospects. Why it happens. Reliance on founder network has plateaued. No repeatable outbound or PLG loop. And what that means is you don't have a solid sales process. The founder is only reaching out to the people that they already knew and continually reaching out to them and not building the customer base in a meaningful way. Founder blind spot. Believing product isn't ready so sales can wait. Ooh, right in the feels. That is a really important one to go ahead and highlight is it's very common for founders to not want to roll things out until they're ready. And the arguably best founder who I've ever met, who I respect immensely, very clearly when he hired me years ago, he said, our product is a C minus, but our team is an A team. And that's something he said in the interview process before hiring me. And that's something that he actually brought into sales calls because he didn't sell the existing product. He sold the solution the product already was. Like, here's this critical problem. Our solution fixes it. We have solved the initial problem. You should invest in us just for that. But what I'm actually selling you isn't the product as it is now. What I'm selling you is the team, the people behind this, the talent that built this first piece, and talent that's going to build the next piece, the next piece, and the piece after that. So he sold the idea, the vision, the future of the company as a whole complete package. He didn't just sell the day one product. And that was a huge lesson because I saw that product evolve into something incredible. It did that because you had early adopter customers who paid into it and were part of the development process, who told their friends about this cool thing, who got excited about it. So you had paying beta signups or early access folks who funded the actual later versions of the product that delivered on the initial promise. That's a really important feedback loop to have because it's never going to be perfect. You should never assume your product is ever going to be perfect, and you should roll it out and get paying signups as quickly as possible. You want that MVP, that minimum viable product, the most bare bones of basic version of the thing that solves the problem you're looking to solve. And then you can build on it from there. But start with that skeleton, start with the bones, start when it looks like crap and is hot and pink all over the place. Start working and building interest as early as possible. That's how you build pipeline. That's how you build runway. That's how you get initial interest. That's how you start with your customer acquisition in the first place. You don't start by going to market with a 30-year developed product that's been, polished up by 1,000 developers. You don't do that. You don't enter the market as like the best in the industry. You enter the market as the scrappy person who's going to build something great and has something pretty good to start. So that's obviously a sticking point for me. Unlock play, ship sellable slice. There it is. Run 30-day discovery sprint with 50 cold calls a day. And I like the hard metric on that because 50 cold calls a day sounds like a lot on paper. But if you commit to doing that, that's a very achievable goal, especially since most calls are going to be short. A lot of people aren't even going to pick up. And those who do, you'll learn a lot from the calls that you have. And that will not only get you started, it will also help move forward more quickly and influence the way that you're developing. Nuclear option, hire an interim CRO with clawback and give 90-day quota or cut. And again, that's still that. The chief revenue officer, and that is a perfect case for a fractional hire. Somebody who's has the experience is really good, like has that CRO, the chief revenue officer, who is somebody who can make sales. We're talking like a really good account executive, but who comes in with executive level experience, but is also somebody who can actually do it. This isn't somebody who's going to hire other people and farm out the work. Somebody who's actually going to do it. You could also make the case in this question for a chief marketing officer instead of a CRO, depending on what your sales process looks like and whether you have too few customers or too few conversions. If you have too few conversions, and really it could go either way, which route you take, but executive level fractional hires are a perfect gap fill for all of these situations we're seeing in different ways, particularly this one. This one is pretty permanent, so I'd be very, very nervous about this, where the interim CRO is a much healthier approach because what that does is give you someone to really earn the money. If your weak point is making sales, a CRO is a really good person to bring in. If your weak point is making decisions about the company, period, then it's pretty much dead already. And this bringing in an interim CEO is basically killing a company already, which is, product and tech. Oh, yeah, we're very close. Roadmap drift, engineering chasing minor feature requests, no strategic North Star. And again, I've seen this go both ways as well. I was working with a company where they put all hands, the entire dev team, on the specific feature based on kind of a tough news cycle. And Google does this sometimes too. Uh, and it hurts the company long term because you're neglecting the really important day to day stuff to roll out this big new feature. And sometimes it lands and goes well, and that effort turns out to pay for itself. Other times it doesn't, and you've really lost progress on every single number. And with a startup, you can't really afford to make that decision wrong because you have limited resources and limited time. You want to get that one right. So that is the strategic North Star. If you're doing a strategic North Star, you better have a good idea what you're doing. Um, and it's very helpful to have a good project manager mind somewhere on the team who can coordinate features and figure out what your priorities should be in conjunction with the founder vision of like where you want this to go and where customers are driving it to go. There's a whole couple pieces that should influence that overall direction and help you make key decisions on that roadmap plan. But you don't want to have a rigid roadmap from day one that never changes. That's that's a risk signal. Why it happens. Fear of saying, oh, here we go. Signal, sprint goal set week of, not quarter ahead. NPS stagnates. Yeah, so there it is. Your goals are set. You have very short-term goals set. You don't have long-term goals. Not having long-term product goals is a bad sign. NPS stagnates. And I don't put a bunch of stock in NPS scores, but that is just customers are middling to unhappy. It's more or less the same that that means. So if you have a read on how your customers feel, if they are bored, that's kind of a flag. Why it happens. Found fear of saying no to the only few paying customers. And that's important. This is a really big one because the strategic North Star isn't just a specific thing, it's also a concept. I just talked about that other founder before, the founder who sold the vision of the company in the future. He was able to clearly articulate where it was going, key features that were exciting to people then and there, right there. He said, hey, in a couple of years, this is our goal. To be able to say you have a goal a couple of years down the line and have it be a good goal that people can get behind and believe in is hugely important. You should have something in those conversations and not only have that, but have reasoning behind it that you can use to put into a conversation to actually sell it as an idea. So that is what gets here. So if you're saying no, there should be a reason for it. You should have a well articulated reason for why you're not doing specific things, and you should communicate that and be unapologetic about it. You don't want to be babying your customers because that's a negative feedback loop. You don't want to be doing every single feature that everyone asks for just because that is actually going to dilute your product and team very quickly. So this is an important one. Let's see, founder blind spot, mistaking bespoke work for product market fit. Yes, and if your tool is too customized for each customer to the point that it's unsustainable, it doesn't look like a mass market product. Like say, for example, your e-commerce tool ends up being an e-commerce tool only for people selling a specific breed of puppy. Like that's a problem because boy, does that narrow your market and makes for a tool that isn't translatable to other markets. So like that's a huge challenge. So yeah, that right there. Unlock play, declare single flagship job to be done and kill side quests. So kill side quests is a little extreme, but you do want to narrow down the top priority features and then have an actual tiered feature list where it's like North Star, couple features maybe, probably one big goal. And then you have like bug fixes, key things that you want to add in the meantime, and then everything else is on the list but shouldn't be prioritized equally. That helps always make sure there are things on your strategic journey for your product that will make sense, that could fit in if you have the time or the resources, but you're not chasing every single little thing at any given moment. Nuclear option, fork code base. Core platform versus professional services repo. Oh, God. That is a nuclear option. Okay. And then finally, we have feature bloat over core value, which is really similar to the last one, but this is the product and tech category. As homepage lists 12 value props, none differentiated. So it's new website, shiny website, popular website. It's website. You could just have that be a single product website, or it could be, single page website versus uh, detailed, intensive school website or something, and just have something that actually separates the different options to make sure they are supposed to be distinct options. And if they are, make sure that there's something very clear about what each makes which one what. The same applies to pricing tiers. If you have like intro, pro, and enterprise, it should be really, really clear what the differences are between them. And that should speak to each individual possible market segment. Let's see. Signal activation rate falling, onboarding screens multiply each quarter. So it takes longer to go ahead and actually roll people into the product. You should always be looking to streamline and speed up your onboarding process. The longer it is, the longer it takes to get customers to value. There's that activation energy for your customers. And the less excited they are. Because unless your onboarding is super fun, it's a barrier between the client actually paying and the client actually getting what they're paying for, which nobody likes. Why it happens. Panic builds. Every lost deal adds a feature ask, product vision dilutes. And that's the thing is you have to be resilient to taking some losses. And there's a balance to that too. If you're taking a ton of losses, you should be taking a really honest look and be like, okay, what's not working? But if you're taking losses here and there, you have to be able to weather that and keep your steady hand on the rudder and make sure you're focusing on your North Star and your overall goals rather than focusing on one negative review, for example. Founder blind spot, confusing breadth with defensibility. Yeah, yeah. Unlock play, delete 50% of menu, which is cut down your products list, and relaunch opinionated wedge. Ooh, opinionated wedge, I like that. Taking a bold stand in terms of what you're selling, because that really helps you find the right customers and focus more heavily on selling that to them in a way that helps build momentum. It's good. Nuclear options, spin off secondary modules as paid add ons or sunset them. Yeah, that's yeah, pretty good. So there we go. So let's look at a real world example. Here's a quick example. It's actually a Reddit post I saw with somebody who's in a zombie startup situation. It said, I am the founder of a zombie startup. We raised about 11 million in funding in the market peak. And this is from a year ago, so this is 2025 early. Never could find a repeat customer acquisition channel. Oof. So they were getting customers, but not consistently. So they would get like a couple customers from digital advertising, a couple customers from Reddit, a couple customers from referrals, but none of them were consistent customer growth, which is interesting. We're doing about 1.3 million ARR driven by a small number of enterprise SaaS customers, and that could be like four customers at that MRR, depend or that ARR depends on what they were selling the product for. We cut down to a handful of employees and now generating a small amount of cash. So that was one of the nuclear options. You shrink down the team, go to layoffs, sustain as much as you can, and then you end up being cash flow positive, which is that's a good starting point to get to the point where you can keep the lights on and make payroll for the team that you have. Then you have to figure out another way to get growth. A couple more big customers to get you more ARR, more money to play with. Um, Maybe upsell to your existing customers. There are different directions to go from there. Will continue to grow slowly, but hopefully, but realize this is not a VC outcome business. Yeah, if you're keeping the lights on and making payroll, that's kind of a standard business, not a startup, and certainly not one that a VC will invest in expecting a return on investment and a profitable exit. Things are now more on autopilot as we are coasting a little more. The founding team is definitely burned out from pushing so hard. So I think there is a sense of relief that we are jumping off the treadmill. I am technical and most of our product has been built out. And since we can't find a repeatable sales channel, it doesn't really make sense to invest more in sales. So it seems like we are a zombie company. And I worry that we may never get much out over the pref where this makes financial sense. Precipice, maybe. But at the same time, I kind of just want to coast for a while and take a salary and maybe try another business if I see something interesting come along. I have a young family, so it's a welcome shift, TBH, to be honest. Curious to get thoughts from other founders in similar situations. Thank you so much. And I do need to dig in the comments too, because there's quite a bit of activity on this. But I wanted to highlight a lot of things that are said there. So the acquisition channel. And this is one of those things where a lot of founders come at this thinking that acquisition channels are by necessity really expensive. If you have one of my favorite examples is a company like PostHog or a company like Ask Elephant, where you have individuals on the team routinely talking about the work that they're doing day to day. That builds a ton of visibility. It builds a lot of awareness of what they're doing and the kind of people who are on the team. That is one of those consistent low effort approaches you can do to build traction in exactly this situation. So have a meeting, talk about the situation, about being cash flow positive, but wanting to explore some growth. And that's, again, one of the options you can throw out if people on the team, one even, or a couple, are down to try and approach like that, to talk about what you're doing and be able to share that broadly. Do some YouTube videos, do some posts on LinkedIn, do that consistently, show up for a while and see if that translates into growth, which it should. And then maybe you'll get one or two more high paying customers who can then translate into a little bit more marketing. And then you get some consistent growth and momentum. That's one case to do here. But there's a lot in this. So this is a technical founder, not used to that part of it. Seems like they're doing pretty well generally. Like this is actually, I would consider this on some level a success story, but you definitely need to take a breather. The founding team being exhausted, everyone being burned out. This poster talking about being burned out from having a young family. Like that's a really challenging situation. And if your heart's not in it, it's difficult to go on from this. So this is a case where you could potentially look at a sale. And it doesn't have to be a VC, it doesn't have to be a large scale investment. This is a case where you could potentially sell this to a run of the mill investor or somebody who's looking to buy a business that they can then grow on and build. Like there's room here to sell this. You don't really want to sell it saying it's a zombie company, but you can describe kind of the healthy fundamentals of it and go from there. I look at this, and for me personally, I see this as a challenge. I would love to jump in here, take a look at the customers and product, and see what avenues there are for growth because they're there. They're definitely there. And this is certainly something that could be talked about. And this is a place that could become a success story fairly easily. I also want to highlight this too, though, is that generally speaking, you talk about a zombie company as if it's a failure, as if it's something that went wrong, which really I think is more of a conversation about goals. What you want to do, what you want to get out of this. Like, is your goal to get rich and sell the company and get your VC exit? In that case, you need a pretty serious look at this. Is your goal to make this work and become a profitable growing company? There are ways to do that, including ways to do that are burnout pivots, ways to slightly change what you're doing to take a little bit of the effort off in a way that does still contribute to long-term growth. And I love talking about this stuff. So if that's where you're at, let's talk. Next up, we have a actual case example. And this is one I really wanted to highlight because it's one that is not under the traditional definition of a zombie, and that is Yelp. For those who don't know, Yelp's whole business model was business review software, where businesses are added to the platform. People write reviews of them, they post photos, they put up the hours and such. So if somebody wants directions to a place, if somebody wants to read reviews of it, if they want to see the menu, if they want to see if somebody talks up the milkshake, those are all things that Yelp did. And Yelp's business model was twofold. Number one, it was really community oriented. We get people genuinely excited about being on the Yelp platform, encourage them to add businesses, encourage businesses to be on there and interact with people, and then do community events that bring the people and businesses together in a really healthy way, which builds enthusiasm in a small group that then broadcasts outward as they get really excited and help kind of bring other people in. Very cool. The biggest weak point is, well, there are two, but the initial biggest weak point was monetization. And we'll talk about that here. Um, the biggest challenge being that Yelp's base revenue model was ads. And they did a very honorable but very questionable thing here, where the ads they were selling were only sponsored ads for businesses on Yelp. So somebody who's on Yelp could pay to have their business featured highly and appear as recommended for relevant search results over other kind of organic recommendations. And where that was good is it made every single advertisement opt in and very, very relevant to the platform, which was good. Like you're not going to see a pharmaceutical ad when you're searching for burgers, which is good. But the problem is that was basically the only revenue model, and that was definitely not enough. It's hard to sell. It looks kind of funny, and it's like I talk about on LinkedIn. The biggest downside is that meant that you would, if you were looking for like boutique coffee, you could get McDonald's as your first result, which nobody likes. So it was a combination of hard to sell, not making enough money, directly in the way of delivering what the product is supposed to do, as opposed to having just ad banners, and never really made enough revenue. So that was a huge challenge. The second problem was COVID, which pretty much torpedoed Yelp from the core all the way up. So, quick summary here. This is an AI summary, but I've looked this up before. Yelp has experienced a significant decline in relevance, ouch, and market dominance over the past decade. And that, again, goes back to COVID a little bit, but even before that, with user interest falling by 77% from its peak due to, and this is, I don't really feel this one, from due to intense competition from Google reviews. While not dead, the platform has seen its influence wane as users shift toward more integrated, convenient options. There's a lot of highlights there. Um, Google reviews are there on maps. So if you're searching for restaurants, if you're searching for lunch, the easy fallback is the thing you're using for to search on the map, which is Google. So most of the time. So if you're searching Google Maps for restaurants, you'll read the reviews right there. That's a massive advantage that Google has. However, Google reviews are generally not very good. They're not curated. They don't have the community focus that Yelp did. What Yelp did is do a really, really good job of encouraging a volume of reviews, encouraging good information for the businesses, and encouraging a higher quality of review. Like they did a really good job mastering that piece. And that's something that Google reviews never did or tried to compete with. They just never needed to. And the thing is now that Yelp is not the active physical presence it was for so long, which is why it's backslid quite a bit, is it hasn't been able to uphold that social momentum because physical events were shut down and the company had to contract aggressively. I don't think this is a win for Google Reviews because Google Reviews hasn't done anything innovative or right aside from just being there. It's more that Yelp was unable to maintain what they were doing. Um, yeah, so Google dominance, Google prioritized its own local search and review services, capturing the audience that used to rely on Yelp. And that's kind of iffy. Like Google's just present. They haven't done anything particularly smart in this field. They've taken the easiest possible approach, which has worked because they were able to do that for a very long time, where Yelp had to work to steal that market share. So it's more just inevitability than it was necessarily Google doing anything right in this case, because Google doesn't really encourage people to write reviews or good reviews. It doesn't encourage businesses to post their information on it very well. It doesn't do the actual legwork that Yelp did. It's just there. And since Yelp and Google are both there, there's nothing to differentiate them except that Google is closer to where you're looking, where Yelp had to earn your trust before and isn't able to keep that up anymore. Monetization issues. This is a big one, which is funny because Google reviews are not monetized at all, but they don't have to be because they have other monetization methods, and that is key. So and there's two parts here. So this says accusations of aggressive, unethical advertising sales tactics, accused of extortion, harmed its reputation. And I've heard this before that Yelp's sales team was really aggressive selling those ads. But I already highlighted the problems with their monetization model, period. What they were doing was never going to keep the lights on from the outset. That was not a healthy enough revenue model to actually work. It just wasn't. You could have that be a piece of the model. That's fine. But really, they should have done da, 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 and that we'll get to that. Missed opportunities. They should have done things like this. Yelp failed to scale effectively, missing chances to dominate local transactional spaces. I talk a lot about point of sale monetization. So in app bookings, so being able to pay a little bit to make a reservation, or food delivery. So competing with Glovo or Uber Eats, Yelp had the opportunity to do that early. They could have gotten in on food delivery or reservations first, and they didn't. And then as effectively as competitors, and they're as effective as competitors. I mean, they just didn't do it. So there were other places where Yelp could have monetized, added different revenue streams, gotten their sales team to be less aggressive on the advertising side, and then also gotten their revenue expanded a bit so they could have been more sustainable, especially during COVID. If they'd been doing food delivery, food pickup, like apps like Too Good to Go are a really great example. If they were doing things more like that, they would have had a healthier revenue stream and been able to keep doing what they were doing. And this says changing consumer habits. I don't buy that. I don't think that's true. I've talked about Google just kind of inevitability winning users back. And then Instagram is not a dedicated review. Like Instagram does not review businesses. That's an AI fumble. Um, Current status, shifting focus. Yelp remains active in specific sectors and is adapting by incorporating AI-driven review insights, which doesn't fix the revenue model. Struggling stock. The stock has seen substantial declines because there's no reason to invest in Yelp right now because they're not the company itself is not what it was, falling around 61% since 2014 peak. Scale back. This was a big one. The company halted most international expansion in 2016, focusing on the North American market. And it wasn't just international expansion. They had a program where they had part-time community managers. They had the community ambassador program, which was highly effective at building up the user base in metros that they weren't in necessarily. I watched that work firsthand. I was a community ambassador with a team of other community ambassadors. That was really cool and a really smart way to low effort, low investment, expand the Yelp user base and brand into places it wasn't before. That was great, not only for the local metros, but also as a draw for the really big Yelpers from the bigger metros who come to that space and participate in the local Yelp community, which is another self-compounding enthusiasm loop. Really big deal. Um, but I think the core problem still goes back to the revenue model. Yelp didn't have a way to keep the lights on that was sustainable, that actually made enough money to justify what they were doing. This goes back to all of those zombie criteria we were just talking about. Like they had phenomenal user growth, they had tons of activity. Yelp is a big, big deal for a tech company, but they never had a good way to make money. And that was always going to be the challenge. That was challenge from day one. And they were very successful for a long time, but just weren't profitable or what's the word? Resilient enough to deal with some of the challenges. And that expansion in 2016 was a big, I think, a big fumble. But again, that goes back to the revenue model. Like, had the revenue model also been scalable internationally and not been the single hyper specific revenue model they had, that could have worked. So, yeah, man, it's, yeah, yeah. And that's a big one to bring up because it is a zombie company by most standards, and it is now behaving as an early stage startup. And it's something that to talk about a lot because the model was brilliant. Yelp as a platform model, as a user acquisition model, as a growth model is still a really extraordinary study to learn from. But how it's the state it's in right now is pretty tragic. And you can pinpoint back to why it is in that situation. And it is because they didn't focus on the bottom line, on actually getting revenue. And as someone who was a Yelp user who really loved everything around it, I really want to find ways where they could have or could still generate sustainable revenue without harming the core business and the core revenue model. If anyone from Yelp is watching this, I would love to talk because I think this is still fixable. And I would love to have the opportunity to raise the ship back up. And this is one of the things that keeps coming up is that in every single case, the problems being faced by zombie startups or zombie companies in general are fixable. It just takes a will to do it and then potentially a little bit of a runway. So this is something that I'm really focused on right now because it is when you see the points of failure and why things don't work, it really helps to influence how you drive companies that will work. So of course you can learn from fails, you can learn from mistakes, you actually can potentially learn more from failures than successes. Um, and so it's important to keep an eye on these and see like what did they do well, what happened, what went wrong, why are we here, and how do we get past this zombie moment. So this is cool conversation. I've talked a long time. We'll leave it here. Cheers. Till next time.